Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video series, I am explaining how to get a declaration of nullity in the Catholic Church. Many people want to marry in the Catholic Church, but they cannot do it because there is a previous marriage in the way. As I have explained in the second video of this series, in some cases it is possible to dissolve the previous marriage. However, the most common and well-known option is the annulment or declaration of nullity. In order to get the declaration of nullity, the marriage must have been invalid. Evidently, if the marriage was valid, it can't be declared invalid. Three things can make a marriage invalid: the defect of canonical form, the impediments, and the defects of the consent. We will see the different defects of consent in several videos of this series. In this video, we are going to focus on the defect of form and the impediments. Canonical form is mandatory for Catholics even if only one of the spouses is Catholic. For the Catholic Church, the marriages of Catholics outside of the canonical form are not considered valid. In this sense, it is possible to be married before the legal system of a given country, but is still single before the legal system of the Catholic Church. In order to get married in the canonical form, the spouses must exchange their matrimonial consents in the presence of a qualified assistant and two witnesses. The qualified assistant is the pastor of the parish or the bishop of the diocese where the wedding is celebrated. Other priests, like the bishops and presbyters and deacons, can officiate weddings, but only if they have received delegation to do so from the competent bishop or pastor. Without this delegation, the wedding is invalid. The witnesses are two people who are present at the celebration. They do not need to be Catholic nor even adults. They need to be able to testify that the wedding was indeed celebrated. Nowadays, many Catholics get married only civilly, outside of the canonical form. In the eyes of the Catholic Church, these civil weddings of Catholics are not considered valid. This was the case, for instance, of Letizia, Queen of Spain, who had civilly married another man years before the royal wedding with the Prince of Asturias. For the Catholic Church, Princess Letizia was single. Catholics who attend merely civil marriages do not need a formal declaration of nullity. In these cases, it is enough with presenting in the parish the baptismal certificate and the civil certificates of marriage and divorce. These documents are enough to prove that there was no valid marriage. However, in some places of the world, this process is a little bit more difficult. For instance, in many American dioceses, such matters are not dealt with in the parish, but in the chancery of the diocese. The process is slightly more complicated, but not a lot. Properly speaking, the defect of canonical form takes place when the parties try to celebrate a wedding in the Catholic Church, but some essential element is missing. For instance, this would be the case if the witnesses were not present or if the officiant didn't have the delegation. However, these cases are very uncommon. An example of these would be the wedding of William Wallace and his beloved Marion in the movie Braveheart. The secret wedding is celebrated before the priest without the witnesses. This marriage would be invalid today, but it would have been valid then, because the law of the Church did not require yet the canonical form for the validity of the marriage. The second source of matrimonial nullity are the impediments. The impediments are laws that prevent the consent from generating a marriage. In other words, even if the person gives a consent which is valid in itself, due to the impediment, this consent does not create a marriage. Some impediments are based on natural law and cannot be dispensed. Other impediments, on the other hand, have been established by the Church and are subject to dispensation. Obviously, if an impediment was dispensed so that the wedding could be celebrated, it will not be possible afterwards to request a declaration of nullity based on that impediment. Marriage is a fundamental right. Therefore, the right to marriage can only be limited in special cases in order to protect the common good or to avoid unfair situations. Because of this, there are only 12 impediments. Let us take a quick look at them. Age. Females under 14 and males under 16 years of age cannot marry. It does not matter what are the customs of the land or the maturity of the parties. These weddings are always invalid. Impotence. Those who are not able to perform intercourse cannot get married. This impediment only affects those who are completely impotent, not those who experience difficulties or who are sterile. Prior bond. Since marriage is exclusive, those who are already married cannot marry another person. This impediment only operates if the previous marriage is valid. If the previous marriage is invalid, even if the nullity has not been declared yet, there is no impediment of prior bond. Disparity of worship. A Catholic cannot marry a non-baptized person unless a dispensation is granted. This impediment does not apply to Catholics who marry members of other Christian churches. Holy orders. Bishops, presbyters, and deacons are subject to celibacy and cannot get married. If they celebrate a wedding, it is invalid. However, in some cases, the Church grants a dispensation to priests and deacons who leave the ministry. Only the Pope himself has the right to give this dispensation. Vow. Monks, sisters, friars, and all the members of religious institutes cannot marry if they have professed their perpetual vows unless they have received the required dispensation. Abduction. If a woman is abducted, she cannot marry her captor until she is not away from him in a safe place. Otherwise, the marriage would be invalid even if the woman wants to marry. Crime. Those who conspire to kill a spouse with the intention to marry each other cannot marry validly. Consanguinity. It is impossible to marry one's parents, siblings, grandparents, or grandchildren. These prohibitions are based on natural law and cannot be dispensed. On the other hand, it is forbidden to marry one's cousins, uncles, aunts, nephews, or nieces, but it is possible to obtain a dispensation. Affinity. It is not possible to marry the close relatives of the previous spouse. For instance, a widower cannot marry the daughter of his late wife, nor her mother. However, the impediment does not apply to the siblings-in-law. Public propriety. It is not possible to marry the close relatives of one's prior common law or de facto partners, that is, those with whom one has lived as spouses but without being married. Adoption. Adopted children cannot marry their adoptive parents. Of the 12 impediments, the most frequent is the impediment of prior bond, especially in countries where divorce is more common and also where Catholics are a minority. In the case of Catholics, it is more difficult that this nullity takes place, because Canonical Form makes all marriages celebrated outside of the Canonical Form invalid. Moreover, the Catholic Church is very thorough in making sure, before every wedding, that the bride and groom are free to marry. In order to declare the nullity of a marriage due to a prior bond, one of the parties must be validly married to someone else at the time of the wedding. Since this can be hard to understand, I'm going to explain it with an example. Let's say that Amanda marries Kevin. Both Amanda and Kevin are not baptized. Then Amanda divorces Kevin and marries Omar, who is also not baptized. Then Omar divorces Amanda. If Omar wants to marry Anna, who's Catholic, Omar can request a declaration of nullity of his marriage to Amanda. Indeed, since the Catholic Church doesn't recognize civil divorce, Amanda is still married to Kevin and her wedding with Omar was invalid. However, it will be necessary to have Kevin's cooperation to make sure that his wedding to Amanda was valid. Indeed, if Kevin had a previous marriage or if he had been subject to another impediment, his marriage to Amanda would have been invalid and the marriage between Amanda and Omar would be valid. Now, let us imagine that after her divorce from Omar, Amanda wants to marry Samuel. Amanda cannot request the declaration of nullity of her second marriage due to the prior bond because in the eyes of the church she is still married to Kevin. Even if the nullity of her marriage to Omar was declared, Amanda could not marry Samuel because her marriage with Kevin impedes it. There is, however, one exception to this. If Kevin had passed away after Amanda's marriage to Omar, Amanda would be free to marry Samuel because the marriage with Kevin made her marriage with Omar invalid. When Kevin died, his marriage with Amanda was dissolved, and it is not an impediment for her to marry Samuel anymore. Usually, the declarations of nullity due to defect of form and impediments are processed in a simple procedure which does not take very long. However, since these are rather complicated issues, it is always a good idea to consult our case with an expert in canon law. It is also advisable to contact the diocesan tribunal to ask for practical orientation. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please share it with those who may find it useful. If you have questions, write them below in the comment section and I will be happy to help.